but
Yeah.
talk a little bit.
um,
What are the early uprisings have to do with the
uh,
with the movement today, and what and I think Devin sort of spelled out what movements gave birth to some part of the early LGBTQ plus movement, and why is this heritage important to maintain now?
yeah. So for me, I think the movements. Oh, sorry. Okay. Yeah. I guess I can speak to the second part a bit more than the first part. But why the heritage of our history needs to, continue to stay where I mean, to continue to thrive and be understood today is just because of like representation. A lot of times, I think in communities of color, we don't see ourselves as like as queer or as trans and stuff and things like that. And so we still get conversations in the community about like, oh, that's a white thing, or oh, um that's their issue and that's not our issue. And unfortunately, that gets a lot of people of color in some unfortunate situations with violence, with police and also with other civilians as well. So continuing to say that it was drag queens, continuing to say that it's trans women of color who threw the brick or who were at the protest or at these events really continues the narrative, that the true narrative of what happened those nights, and continues to put people of color up front in the discussion. And so it really helps to make people who may not understand that if your child is becoming, queer, if the child is coming out as queer to you or the child's coming out as trans to you, it's not just a recent thing. There's this whole history of what's happened in the past and also around the world, all the different third gender, not organizations, but the third gender like groups and different people that like you could look back at and go, wow, these people are, were from a long time ago. So this is not nothing new. And so I think understanding the heritage continues to help people understand that this is not a recent thing that just happened 5 or 10 years ago. This is something that's been in the community, and I think it helps us to understand each other a lot more and continue to continue the discussion and continue to like liberate us. So.
Someone else want to jump in? Feel free.
I see Hadley's hand.
I don't have too much more to add. I think it's important just to highlight that the nature of the struggles were, these first struggles were revolutionary and anti-capitalist and working class, and anti-police. And I think a lot of that has maybe been forgotten by maybe like the mainstream LGBTQ community. We've made a lot of progress since then as far as civil rights and anti-discrimination laws and things like that. But it's almost as if that stuff is kind of like a placation a little bit. And I don't think we can settle for just, laws that tell people to respect our identities. Like we need actual equality. We need social equality, and like we need our material conditions to be affected. Like it's not enough just to like tell people to respect us. It doesn't go far enough, I guess.
Does anyone else want to add to this point before we move on into the meat of the discussion?
And I think it flows. I mean, Devin sort of stepped into it.
Devin set the stage very well. So I'm going to move on to our second question, which is kind of a two-parter. Why is it so essential that we keep cops and Zionist colonizers out of Pride? And how do we fight rainbow capitalism and Zionist pinkwashing, as well as confronting counter-revolutionary people within the LGBT community or movements who seek to include these forces? How can we prevent and protect from queerphobia in left spaces? Well,
Yeah, I'd like to address the first part about the cops and Zionist colonizers, because I think it's multi faceted. When it comes to Israel, there are a lot of people who say, oh, Israel is, the most progressive and tolerant country when it comes to LGBT rights in, the Levant, in the Middle East, which is one, demonstrably not true. And two, even if it were true that Israel was, you know, was progressive when it came to LGBT rights, that doesn't excuse the brutal oppression and genocide ongoing against the Palestinian people. And I think this dovetails very well with another point, which is there is a current in the mainstream that seeks to bring LGBT people into the sort of dominant order, into the capitalist order. We can see this with a lot of the pushback against transgender people being banned from serving in the US military. Obviously, that had reactionary and bigoted reasons, but the liberal sort of reaction of, why shouldn't trans people be allowed to fight for our country is very silly to me, because why would anyone want to go fight for the US and brutally oppress countries all around the world to maintain US imperialist order, which is what the military is all about? What we need to fight against and what we need to be aware of is any opportunities that the system is going to take to extend us a hand to participate in the violence of the system. And I think I don't want to say that they're necessarily deliberately related, but I think that I think that those two things are linked when it comes to Zionism and pinkwashing at Pride, and cops too, because a lot of police departments either are steadily accepting gay officers or putting rainbow flags and stickers on their cruisers, while at the same time brutally oppressing homeless, LGBT people, sex workers, etc. So yeah, I think we have to be aware of the intersections there.
Absolutely.
Devin, were you trying to speak? You're muted.
No, speaking to my boyfriend who just came into the room. Sorry.
I could throw something in because this is such a big question. And so we've dealt a lot with why don't we want the colonizers? And, historically, just so people know, I mean, historically in San Francisco, the Israeli consulate has donated money to SF Pride. They've had films in the Frameline, which is like the showing of different movies during Pride, and anti-Zionist groups queer groups have gone in and staged them. I once went and we did a whole big disruption in the middle of this film to stop it from playing. But the consulate has had, they have floats in the Pride March. And so the issue of, of not only getting, sort of theoretically getting the colonizers out, just physically getting the colonizers out is so important to us, as well as the fact that it's generally police that lead the Pride March. I mean, there's usually the dykes on bikes, and behind the dykes on bikes are the dykes or the supposedly, the LGBTQ plus members of the police. And so how does this relate to what we're trying to do? What can we do? And we issued, the caucus issued a statement, no cops or colonizers in Pride. And and certainly the Black Lives Matter movement is totally behind the issue of no cops being in Pride. But what can we do about this? Or what should we be doing about this? And everyone's on mute, so if somebody wants to talk, you got to come off mute too.
I mean, I just think it's important to reiterate just that we can't involve any of our Pride activities with police or any form of law enforcement. There's just such a clear like intersection between like police brutality and gender identity and sexual expression too. I know in New York they just recently repealed the loitering for prostitution laws. But as far as I know, those probably still exist in other states. And just, the way police use the minority status of certain groups to brutalize and control them, the same way that the IDF does to Palestinians in Israel. And yeah, I mean, it just goes back to like, Stonewall too. It's like, they're essentially just like completely opposed to everything that we need to organize around, basically. Anti-capitalism and not accepting being brutalized just for being a minority.
I guess I have a small anecdote. I'll try to make this very brief. In 2019, Strive, and Indigo will remember this as well, we protested our own Pride, like Pensacola Pride, because we wanted them to remove the national anthem. Because Francis Scott Key was a lawyer who represented slave owners in court and was an advocate of slavery until he died. That's not something we should take pride in. That's not something that should be sung at any event. And so we asked the old Pride group to please remove that. They did not. So we did a protest during the singing of the national anthem, which caused us to be directly targeted. The old Pride also charged $75 for booths at Pride that year, which is where we live. There are a lot of working class queer and trans people, a lot of homeless queer and trans people, and $75 is inconceivable to pay for a booth at Pride. I know in bigger cities it's even more, but for this area, $75 is a lot of money for a table. So we refused to pay that money because that could go towards getting a motel for an evening for a homeless trans woman. And we instead set up a table anyway, and we were giving out free hygiene products to working class queer people. And they sent a cop over to shut down our booth. And I'll never forget, the cop was the only lesbian on the police force. And she was the one who came over and shut our booth down. And it was just it was a very damning moment for her, for us. And it was a real reminder that at the end of the day, the role of the police is to protect private property. Coincidentally, private property is one of the core reasons for anti-gay and anti-trans violence that still persists to this day. But it was the fact that this attack on trans people, because most of us at the table were trans, there were trans people of color there. Almost all of us live below the poverty line. And it was a very grim reminder of the fact that the inclusion of LGBTQ people on the police force is not a progressive victory. In fact, it's a reactionary nightmare. You're not going to get a more inclusive police force by having, the sole lesbian on the police force. She's going to uphold the rule of the police, which is to perpetuate fascist violence and protect private property. You're not going to reform the police by adding oppressed and colonized groups to it. You're just going to bring those people in, and those people voluntarily go in and then turn around and attack their own people. So, it's critical that we keep cops out of Pride, because it's not an inclusive gesture. It is a reactionary attack on us.
Thank you, Devin.
I'd like to jump in really quickly because I think y'all brought up such amazing points. And I especially want to kind of go into, Devin, your anecdote about the lesbian cop, and then both you and Judy's discussion about direct action. Because one of my most distinct memories from Pride is from 2016, just after the Pulse nightclub shooting. I was 16 years old, and it was that year, the SFPD and I guess the city of San Francisco took it as a huge signal, an opportunity to just bring an influx of highly militarized, highly securitized cops into the SF Pride space to keep us safe. And I think now that some of us queers have achieved a certain amount of property ownership, economic stability, privilege within society, cops use that subsection of the community as an excuse, use protecting that subset of our community, which is small and very often betrays the rest of us, as an excuse to invade and terrorize spaces that were created by and meant for working class, trans women of color. And there was, to my teenage knowledge at the time, no real response that I saw to that influx of cops at Pride. And I think it's those moments of shift where we as a community need to be really decisive and really ready to make bold, in your face signals of resistance to this kind of inviting of us into systems of violence. I think it's the same with the gay friendly birthright trips. There needs to be a huge amount of really vocal outcry about that kind of, I don't know, temptation.
Okay. Anyone else like to weigh in on this? We are sort of going into a very related area. And there'll be plenty of room to, just so the panelists know, you will have time for final comments. So if you don't feel like you've been able to express yourself on a certain point. But all of us, I think, are very aware that there has been an uptick in anti-trans legislation. Some of it is being passed, some of it is not, but it is creating a whole climate of fear, particularly for trans youth who are really being targeted by a lot of these bills. And at the same time, there really definitely has been an increase in violence against particularly Black trans women, but other trans people, not only by the police, but by bigots and transphobic people. And so my question is, and by the way, just so at least the audience knows, the LGBTQ plus Caucus called for a week of action in support of the trans community to defend trans youth. And it's still, right now, it's still going on. I'm hoping somebody can drop that into the chat and you can spread the word and join with an action. It can be anything from social media campaign to protesting some of the organizations that pretend to be so supportive of the LGBTQ plus community, but are really funding the bills that are that can oppress trans youth. So the question is, why are these bills coming up now? What do you know about them, and what's being done to fight them?
So I get it would. So in our state of Florida, they unfortunately passed both the anti-sports trans bill, trans women bill, and then also I think the parent bill of rights as well, which was the one where if you, for example, let's say you come out as trans to like your guidance counselor, for example, literally that guidance counselor has to go and talk to the parents. They kind of bypass HIPAA in a sort of way. They just bypass it and they go like, I have to go. Or and also in school as well, like if their sexual education or there's like some sort of class that the parent might deem controversial, let's say it's, you know, a Black history class or queer history class or something like that, they can pull their kid right out of that class if they find out they're in that class. So we this upcoming school year is going to be, I don't know, but the reason why I feel like they are doing these bills now was a lot of these kids are definitely vulnerable. A lot of them, they don't, you know, I mean, we talked about it yesterday at a photo shoot for, we're getting interviewed for a photo shoot for Pensa Pride. And a lot of these kids are, while they're very, you know, knowledgeable and they're on their TikTok or on Instagram and they're like, you know, really coming up with their information and they're really, Gen Z for me is impressive, just how much they're just, you know, coming through with radicalness and information and everything. At the same time, though, they don't have, they're not old enough yet to like fight the government in a way where, you know, us older generations can, because we have just that more power to do so. And so while they're in school and stuff, you know, they can't, you know, really march to the Capitol or something like that because they're, you know, so they're in school, so they're easily being able to be easily able, the government's easily able to like try to use parents and use the form of safety, especially when it comes to sports, to attack trans women and trans people in general and queer people when it comes to these bills. So what we're doing to fight it is just a lot of it's more of education. A lot of it's going to be direct action as well, because I think for our state, the next season's coming up in the fall, Devin, I think it is. It's in the fall. So we're already trying to make a coalition of the southern states and try to get together to help each other out fight these bills, because a lot of times we were fighting a bill and then Arkansas was fighting one and then Louisiana was fighting. So we're all over the place trying to help each other out. But now we're trying to gather our forces up for this next legislative season so that we're able to fight back against these bills, because you know, these kids, you know, you want to see them thrive and you want to see them come out earlier, you know, as much as safe as possible. And with these bills, they're not able to. They're held back a bit more, and then unfortunately could cause, you know, people to run away from home, especially with parents and how they can be. They could also unfortunately cause, obviously in the LGBTQ plus community, suicide rates up, you know, is always kind of up. And so, especially among youth, they take it really hard and they can unfortunately, you know, do that. So we're trying our best in our area, and I'm sure everybody else in, you know, across the nation are trying their best to make sure these bills that are getting passed, these bills aren't getting passed, and trying to make the direct action to make sure people know what's going on and understand that we need to continue to fight these.
Thank you. Yeah, go ahead, Devin.
Well, if anybody else wants to go, then I will go after them.
Let's see. Anybody else want to jump in? And
yeah, if you don't mind, I don't have a huge amount to say, but jumping off of what Indigo said about Gen Z, especially, just being, I don't know, they're like a different generation, and I feel like there's a fear among the ruling class that that generation is just going to not put up with this stuff anymore. They challenge ideas, and more deeply they challenge language, which I think is really like a new thing. They come up with new words and new ways of describing things, and I think that's just a huge threat to the structure of capitalist society. And so I think a lot of these bills are just a reaction to that. I think they're really shaking in their boots, because when that generation is able to vote and has even like a little bit of resources to drive to protests and organize more, like they're in for some trouble, I think. So.
Quell, before you go, Devin, Quell, did you want to jump in and add anything about that? Or I guess that's, no, you're good. Okay, go ahead, Devin.
So I made a statement a while back while we were having one of our rallies down here, and I'm not saying it to be controversial, but given my understanding of queer history, we millennials, people myself and Indigo's age, and I also want to point out that me and Indigo, because of the lack of education that we had when we were growing up, we didn't realize we were trans until we were adults. But our generation is the first generation in two or three generations that was not significantly impacted by the AIDS epidemic. And we came out of this era of what is considered a plague, and we said no more, and we started building these resources along with the previous generations who survived, to give to these future generations of youth who do not, so that they do not have to deal with what the previous generations dealt with and what we had to deal with. Because coming up, 12 or 13 years ago, when, I was a child, when Indigo was a young adult, we didn't have the resources that, there was no LGBTQ master post on how to safely get hormones, or, like resource center. There was nothing like that. And that really was not that long ago. I mean, the first iPhone came out, 14 years ago. It has not been that long. And these politicians, these reactionary politicians and lawmakers, see this upcoming generation. I mean, I shouldn't say upcoming, it's here, I think, and not to put you on the spot, Romeo, you're 21, you and I were born in different millenniums. You're born in 2000, but so they see these younger people coming up, and they have these educational resources, and it is an attempt to suppress what can no longer be suppressed. It was easier a long time ago, and now it's not. And that, history dictates, history is always changing. Things are always changing. Things are always in motion. And they are in the decaying stages of capitalism. They're doing their damnedest to suppress. And that's what it looks like with these bills. This is the same shit that happened 5 years ago with the bathroom bills, HB2 in North Carolina. It's this false scare where trans people, bolder, perhaps bolder than ever, are saying, we're not dealing with this anymore. Where queer people are saying no more, and it's an attempt to suppress that. That's why they're coming up now, because all of these resources are available. We're closer to liberation than we ever have been before. And so, of course, there's going to be more of a backlash to that.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Devin. So seeing that nobody else has anything to add, I get to make an announcement, one of my favorite. If you like, this is one of the ads that we're going to have, is that if you like what you are hearing tonight, you should be our comrade. You should be someone who we can keep in close touch with and who we can go on and be involved in many struggles with. Are you interested in joining a revolutionary Marxist-Leninist party in the belly of the beast? A party that has a really strong LGBTQ plus caucus, working every day to build for transgender liberation and more? If so, go to workers.org/join. Fill out the join form here, and an organizer will be in touch with you as soon as we can. It probably should be quicker, but we try to do our best. Go ahead, Romeo.
All right. Our next question is one of my favorites. What role does the struggle for LGBTQ plus liberation play in the larger working class movement? Is it a part of the class struggle for socialism, and why and how? Oh, I saw Quell's hand.
Yeah, I think this is a very important question, because when you think about it, so much of the oppression and so much of the disadvantages we face as LGBT people are related to economic and material circumstances and access to things like housing, food, medicine. Clearly, there is a prejudice component of hatred and bigotry, and clearly wealthier, more well-off LGBT people are not immune from that kind of bigotry and prejudice. But the game changes in every single way when between having money and having access to circumstances and not having those material benefits. So the struggle for LGBT liberation has to be unified with the struggle for working class liberation, because a system which, enables and allows people to be disadvantaged economically, to have to work low wage jobs to scrape by to survive. Obviously, that's not that system doesn't just that system harms not just LGBT people, but working class people of all varieties. And the struggle for socialism is one of economic equality and working class control over our own lives and circumstances, so that being denied access to medicine, being denied a job or housing just isn't something that can happen. So those things have to be inextricably linked in my mind.
Okay. So a word I wanted to use, I should have used it earlier, but like intersectionality, like the connection between all the race, gender, sexuality, class, and just everything. It really comes together. I feel like, and we say this when we do our speeches for events, is like the most marginalized person in the community, if you tend to their needs, you're basically going to be tending to everyone else's needs as you just did that. Because if someone's disabled, Black or Indigenous, trans, person, they have so many issues that pertain to the entire society that once you start to help them, that's going to help you too. And I think a lot of people who are cis and hetero don't understand that, because they're privileged in their one area. Even if they are working class, they still have privilege, and they may not understand that. And so, and I think we talked about it with the youth, that really scares them, because the intersectionality of them understanding and us understanding as well, like, all what we're not putting up with it anymore. We have all this coalition of different people coming from different backgrounds. And so, now the establishment is, trying to its best to quell any sort of type of strong movement, because they know if we tend to these things, we're actually going to have to answer for ourselves, and they don't want that. And you see that now, especially. I mean, you see it, for me, you see it more now with the Democratic Party in power than you see it with the Republican Party in power. You know what the Republicans are going to do. With the Democrats, you immediately start to see them not trying to do anything, and them, or the bare minimum. For example, the Juneteenth thing, we talked about it before the meeting, but before this, the little gesture of giving them a national holiday, but like, there are Black and brown people on the streets getting kicked out of their homes because of COVID. There's all these other issues that are happening. And, those are things that we need to tackle, and it's fine to have that holiday, but it's like, still, there's so many more important things that can be addressed. But you don't want to address that, because then that would be, you would see the fault in how you govern this nation, and how, and the economic system that we're in today. So, that's their biggest fear. It makes them uncomfortable when you have to start addressing people who are marginalized, because now it's like, oh, I'm at fault now. Yes, you are at fault. So but yeah, that's what I want to say.
Thank you so much, Indigo. Yes, Hadley.
I just wanted to add that I think some people have this conception of economic disparities and the disparities that exist in minority groups as far as like access to resources. That this is like some kind of anomaly of capitalism, that it's just like capitalism isn't working correctly. But like, capitalism hinges on there being an exploited minority, and the fact that they convince people that there are like social reasons why people like just deserve to be oppressed, or deserve to not have the things that they need to survive. It's like an excuse, basically. They need someone to exploit, so they're just coming up with reasons, essentially. And that's why we say, like, there's no liberation for everyone, or there's no liberation for I'm saying it wrong, but you know what I mean. There's no liberation for all without liberation for, oh my God. Okay. There has to be liberation for everyone. Sorry, I'm butchering that. Just because, like, if we continue to allow certain groups to be exploited and atomized, then capitalism will continue. There will always be an exploited group.
Can I, do you mind if I just jump in for a second? It's funny, you were talking about minority. To me, the minority is the capitalist class. They are such a tiny and a smaller and a shrinking group of billionaires who never pay any taxes, and who exploit all of us. And those of us who are exploited are in fact the majority. And that, it's sort of, we have such strength in not looking at the little boxes that people try to put them in, but to say we are a majority. The working class, the oppressed, of course, are a majority. In California, where Spanish-speaking people have been so oppressed, that's the majority language. In California, we should all be bilingual and be speaking Spanish, even more fluently than we speak English. But the thing that I just wanted to say is this question, and I don't think anybody looked at it from this end before. One of the things that first attracted me a very long time ago to Workers' World Party was its position on supporting LGBTQ plus rights. And it was at a time when virtually the rest of the left considered the fight, and at that point it was the fight for lesbian and gay rights. They considered it that people who were gay or queer or they were bourgeois decadent. They were something that would disappear. once socialism was established in this country. I mean, really, they would talk about it like that. And there were writings by many of these parties. I mean, it's hard to imagine now, right? But this was actually a discussion on the left. And so for those of us who were out queer communists, it was an argument that we kept having to have. And they would try to, say, oh, you can't be revolutionary because the working class isn't ready for you. The working class is queer. The working class is transgender. The working class is LGBTQ plus. The working class, is anyway. So that's what it sort of brings me up. And it's such an integral part of the struggle for socialism. And I think if people look, if you look at some of the books that Workers' World Party has generated, Bob McCubbin on the lesbian and gay question, and I'm sorry it's called a question. It is not a question. All of the works.
Now it's the roots of lesbian and gay oppression.
Oh, okay. The roots of lesbian and gay oppression. And all of the works by Leslie Feinberg, who really put the historical significance of the fight for socialism and the fight for transgender liberation in a Marxist scientific analysis. And that's what it is. And it is part of the class struggle for socialism. Cuba shows us that it is, because they have done so much in terms of totally turning around a lot of their backward notions about the LGBTQ plus community, and now are championing and building institutions for transgender youth, for transgender people in Cuba. So anyway, that's, to me, when I think of that question, I think, oh my, we've come so far, and I'm so glad. Not that everybody feels that way.
Absolutely. And Judy, some of what you said actually moves us perfectly into our next announcement. So if you are looking for another way to keep up with the struggle for liberation from conditions caused by capitalism, check out our weekly newspaper. A Workers' World newspaper has been in continuous weekly circulation since 1959. And during the first months of the COVID-19 pandemic, the print edition was temporarily suspended, but thankfully we have resumed printing physical copies of Workers' World newspaper again on a monthly basis. We post our weekly PDFs and articles online, and you can also subscribe to receive the Workers' World newspaper by email at workers.org. On that site, you can also find a page with a ton of books, some of which Judy just mentioned, that go into a lot of detail about the history of queer folks within socialism, socialism among queer folks, and the connections between capitalist exploitation, white supremacy, and queerphobia. Now we should move on to our next question.
Okay, so we have sort of touched on it a little bit, but I was hoping that people could talk a little bit more about the police violence against trans people of color, particularly Black trans women, and how is the struggle for Black trans lives part of the LGBTQ plus movement, and how can we show support?
Wow, that's a lot.
I know.
Yeah.
Answer in 30 seconds.
That's a whole discussion on itself. I mean, no, I'm just kidding. But actually, no. I mean, it's, for me, like, I guess on a short little thing, once I read Stone Bush Blues by Leslie Feinberg, once I read that and saw how the police were treating the queer community, I was like, whatever slither of I thought about the police left went out the window. But I guess on the latter half of the question, though, a lot, because right now I think we're at 28 trans people who've been killed this year, which is much more than it was last year, even at this time. And so I think a lot of it is just for me, it's just education. A lot of times it's just not people understanding, people still thinking that this is like decades past, where trans people are just these people who are just for show, or people who are like, they're these like caricatures of what society of what the mainstream society thinks of them. And for me, like shows like Pose and shows that we continue to have representation. And I'm not in the sense of like not going overboard to the sense of like, you know, where we're like, it gets to the point where you're, I guess, selling out and going too far, but enough representation that's real and gives people the, you know, real look into what's happening with Black trans lives, and making and helping people understand that, like, you know, these lives are out here, and we're, you know, we are in the struggle every day, and every time we breathe, like the saying goes, it's a revolution. And just helping people to understand that, like, we talked about it in the first question, from Stonewall and from all these other movements from the past to now, you know, it's something that we have to constantly combat and fight against to get to where we are today. Um, I can't remember her name from Minnesota, but I remember she had gotten to an incident with somebody and stabbed somebody with a nail filer, and she got put in jail.
CC
And
McDonald.
yeah, CC McDonald, yeah. And that was one of the main things I was thinking of immediately when we talked about the police, and because she was obviously defending herself, and she went to the police, and then they were like, you know, they threw her in jail. Um, so for me, that intersection with the cops is just, you know, like anytime there's either a cop of color or a cop who is, um, you know, part of the LGBT community, for me, it means they're going to go even harder on people of their own people, because they have to like make up for the fact that they're not being biased towards their own people. And so that really affects just the community in general, because now you have more people who are afraid of these people going around the streets, and, you know, affecting very much the dynamic of the community. So yeah, for me, it's just the education portion of it, and continuing to have like discussions and continuing to put ourselves out there as much as we can, and to make sure that that we're not these caricatures of the past, and we are actually people, and we are actually um, you know, doing things in the community that, you know, that are bringing about more realization of the collective as a people, so we can be stronger in that way and begin liberation.
Absolutely, Indigo. Thank
Anybody
you.
else want to jump in?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
And I've had to turn my video off because there's something wrong with my phone right now, but you can still hear me, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. So the struggle of Black trans women is paramount and central to the struggle for LGBTQ liberation. It is of the utmost importance. It is what needs to be focused on the most. And it always has been. You know, when I was in San Francisco last month, I found a book in one of the bookstores. It's called Out of the Closet, Voices of Gay Liberation. It's probably the first anthology on gay liberation that was published post-Stonewall. It was published in 1970. And there is an interview in there with Marsha P. Johnson in 1970, where she talks about the violence that she faces. And they ask her in the book, you know, they say, you know how to fight back. Of course, the terminology they use is a little bit different from what we would use today. But they ask her, you know, do transgender people know how to fight back? And she says, yes. Everywhere I go, I have my weapon, my can of mace. And they say, well, have you ever had to use it? And she says, well, no, but I'm patient. Which but it's, you know, it's funny, but it's also very true. You know, so it's central to the struggle. And the best way right now, under the capitalist imperialist system that we live under, the colonialist system that we live under, the best way to show support is to show up for these direct action groups, these survival program groups, these, mutual aid groups, however you want to hash those out, if they're different or not. Because these are the groups that are actually doing things for Black trans women, for trans women of color, for, trans people who are homeless, disabled trans people, and I'm just I'm just gonna plug it again. Our organization Strive, we are the only group, and I don't think I really need to. Well, actually, no, I will. The Panhandle is huge. The Florida Panhandle is huge. It stretches out for over 300 miles. The South Alabama is huge. Southern Mississippi is massive. And we are the only group that does any sort of direct action for Black trans women, for trans women of color. And it is groups like us, with the leadership of Indigo, of myself and of our other members, that really work on the survival of trans people. We're not a 501c3. We don't do that shit. We just don't. We're not interested in playing into the charity industrial complex. So the best thing that people can do in these times is to give money to these groups. If you have a local group in your area that really fights for the survival, I'm not talking about awareness. That word needs to be swept into the dustbin of history. We're done with awareness. We're aware of how oppressed trans people are. We don't, if you have a group like that in your area, you need to throw your support to them. Financial, monetary. If you have, a second home that you use as an Airbnb, and you have a homeless trans woman, a homeless Black trans woman, you need to let her stay in that Airbnb so that she's not out on the streets facing an extreme amount of violence. You need to donate money to these people. If you got a stimulus check and you don't need it, you need to give that money to these groups. Because these are survival groups. I personally do not use the term mutual aid to describe Strive, because it's not aid that we're giving, it's survival. And we're the only one in this part of the country. And if you have a group like that in your area, you need to throw your support behind them, because it's not GLAAD, it's not the GLSEN, it's not the fucking human rights campaign that are ensuring the survival of Black trans women and trans women of color and all other, super exploited and super oppressed groups of trans people. It's organizations and direct action groups like Strive and like other groups that are ensuring this survival. So, I know when when me and Indigo talk, Indigo's kind of like the nicer one. I'm a little more, aggressive, I guess, assertive, but I can't think of anybody who really works harder than Indigo to really, Indigo is our social media coordinator. Anytime, all the news around here of trans people struggling to survive comes from Indigo. And it really comes from the fact that people have to support groups like us. This is not an egotistical thing. This is not self-serving. This is a matter of ensuring the survival of the transgender community under capitalism.
Okay. Thank you, Devin. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for those powerful comments. And we're almost out of time, but would anyone else like to add some quick closing remarks before we close out? This discussion has been amazing. I'm so grateful for all of you.
Yeah, and everyone is entitled. I think we just heard Devin's ending remarks, but if other people have final remarks, please give them.
I don't have much to say, but I did remember that slogan that I butchered earlier. No liberation for all or no liberation for some without liberation for all. I almost butchered it again. I'm sorry. Just so you know what I'm talking about.
Yep.
That's all.
I guess as a final remark, I just want to say, just for the millennials out here, I just want to say, like, we established the groundwork, especially when it comes to like mental health. And so we were kind of, I'm not saying other previous generations didn't talk about mental health, but like we were kind of the first to really put it out there about mental health, and started talking about like, hey, I'm going to my therapist, because before my parents' generation, they're Gen X, so like early Gen X. And I mean, when I was growing up as a kid, I wasn't talking about any sort of mental health, or that just was not, a thing. And so to see like Gen Z and run with that, and also when they're being so revolutionary and so radical, also being able to take care of themselves mentally as they're going through this fight is very important, because I think it's okay to take some rest days. It's okay to drop back a bit and understand that you're putting 100% into something, and like just to not be 100, not go all out all the time, and just understand like your body and understand your mind and understand, there's a lot of things you're seeing right now. There's a lot of things that are happening, and it can affect, what your mental state. And so if you have access to a therapist, if you have enough money for one, or if you have access to really good friends who can help you talk over stuff, because there's a lot of things that happen, especially young trans, especially the ones that are in high school, the trans youth right now. If you have a guidance counselor that actually cares, and that actually will listen, or other administrators or anybody like that, please get to them and talk with them, because like using up all your energy, and don't allow anybody to use up your energy like that. Just because you're young, you could be tired too. Um, you don't have to use everything all the time. So that's what I wanted to say, just to make sure that like, everyone at times takes steps back and make sure that they're okay. And make sure that your strong friends are okay too. The ones that are always, like Devin or like Mallory in our group, the ones that are always up front, and the ones that are fighting for everyone. They need, um, you know, they need help too at times. And so, but yeah, that's all.
Thank you, Indigo. Anyone else? I'll just add my favorite little thing that I say to myself a lot. Queer folks have always been revolutionaries, and revolutionaries have always been queer. There is something so beautiful about the mindset of being a queer person in the world, and it's inextricably linked to revolution. Yeah,
Okay.
thank you all. I'll pass it over to Judy.
Okay, thank you. So comrades, we are, first of all, I want to thank all the speakers. This was a wonderful program. And I have to follow Devin's pitch for funds for groups that don't get funds, with a pitch for funds for Workers' World Party, which also does not get any corporate funding or any funding from, certainly not from the capitalists. And we survive by donations, mostly from our members. So everything under capitalism does take money, unfortunately, and any amount you can donate will help. We put it all into continuing the struggle to bring down the rotten, racist, and oppressive capitalist system. And there are three ways to donate. Venmo, it's on your screen. Venmo at Workers World, the website, www.workers.org/donate, or patreon.com WWP. And the Patreon fund goes directly to providing free subscriptions to our incarcerated siblings behind the walls, who are part of the revolutionary struggles just as much as we are on the outside. Go ahead, Romeo. You take it away.
All right.
I think it's
yeah. Everything under capitalism.
No, thanks to everyone who attended tonight.
Sorry. My My trackpad is terrible. Thanks to everyone who attended tonight's discussion. Join us again in 2 weeks, Thursday, June 30th at the same time, 5 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Central, and 8 p.m. Eastern. Please make sure you don't miss our next live stream. As the LGBTQ plus Caucus of Workers World Party, we ask that you join us demanding that from the river
to the sea,
Palestine will be free, defend trans youth, and stop all attacks on the trans community.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great night and help build a workers' world.
Love and solidarity to all.
Bye-bye.